this guy. All right. Welcome to Wise Women Wednesdays. I am Stevie Carr, founder and CEO of Wise, and I'm so thankful that you have decided to spend your lunch hour with us, investing in yourself and really being able to take this time to reflect on how we are going to move forward together during this really crazy time. I know that for me, being a mom of one, it has definitely been an incredibly challenging and opportunistic time for me to learn a lot about myself these past couple of months. And I think that during this time, I appreciate that whether you have children or you don't have children, that you are a woman here spending time with us today as a community to help understand how we can really support each other and create a community of support. We're going into the holidays. It's already a really tough and challenging time. And how can we really fortify ourselves and build resilience to be able to withstand what's going to be coming up, anything as small as you burnt the turkey, all the way to, something catastrophic. So thank you so much for joining. As you know, one of my most incredibly trusted resources in our WISE community is Dr. Asolomon. She is an incredible resource to not only this community, but from a national perspective, is just really highly regarded in the space of support and security for women. She is one of these women that I had the privilege of meeting, although our lives outside of WISE and Galia Collaborative, of course, connected through, I believe, some sort of a West Side situation with my aunt and her mother, which is just the way that things work in Cincinnati, Ohio. So if you're joining not from Cincinnati, I'm sure that it's like that in your town too, that, the wellness community is small. But one of the things that I've really found that when you ask Ashley to show up for women, she does. And when you ask her opinion on something, she doesn't hold back. She is just a fierce and loyal servant to our community. And I am just so humbled that she would spend the time with us today to be able to share her perspective on kind of how we can fortify ourselves and help support each other and get through this time. So Ashley, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. The last piece I would say is just rules of the road for everybody before we dive in are, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to put them into the chat. This is an incredibly conversational topic, one that I want you to have the opportunity to ask any questions. This is a safe, secure place. We are recording for future viewing. We know that this is a tough time for people to be able to step away. So we are getting a lot of traction on rewatches. So if you don't want something to be recorded and shared, please, you can send it directly to me and I can ask anonymously. Or feel free to reach out directly to Ashley after this session. She's more than happy to answer any questions. So thank you so much. Ashley, take it away.
Thank you, Stevie. That was like the most beautiful introduction ever. What a gift. Thank you. It's been awesome to be connected with the WISE Wellness community. And I'm really grateful to be here today. Just a sound check. Are you hearing me okay? Okay. And if I share some slides, do I have?
Perfect. I will on that right now. Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So like Stevie said, I'd really love for this to be conversational and relevant to what's on the minds of everybody here today. So I do have some slides and some things to sort of share with you all, but I'm hoping that that's more of a conversation sparker and that we can kind of get into what feels really meaningful. I am just curious because there's obviously so much relevance to kind of what's going on in the world today. I know not everybody's on video, but are those of you here, how many people are parents? Okay, So the people I can see, almost everybody was saying, yeah. Okay. So I'll thank you, Tracy. So awesome. So I'll share a little bit too about just what it is like, and hope to have some discussion about what it's like to be a parent right now, and just how obviously all of those, not just for children, but caregiving responsibilities are impacting on our mental health. So I'm going to share my screen so I can share a couple of things with you. 1 second. Hold on. I got to get the right one up. How good was that music?
Oh my gosh, I'm telling you, that
I
song
was really trying not to like.
is so good. And I was like I've been on an Alicia Keys kick lately, so it's a good mix up for me. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, can you see my screen, Stevie?
Yep, looks great.
Okay. Okay, great. So just some baseline assumptions. I thought I'd start with some affirmations that I am using myself quite a lot these days as ways to ground myself in the reality of what is. And as a parent, as a business owner, as all the things, as a human being in this crazy world. But what I've found is that grounding myself each morning with the reality that no one's done this before. There's no playbook. We know this. If we've heard the word unprecedented, we've heard it, if we've heard it once, we've heard it 1,000 times. And we're doing the very best we can. What's interesting though is actually having this discussion just with that idea of, no one's ever been through this before. We're making up the rules as we go. We're trying to figure out how to sort of survive in this crisis period. I was reflecting a lot on that recently, and actually noticing that, like, when I am saying some of those things to myself, I find myself getting more antsy and agitated. And so I actually started thinking back, thinking in my mind through these other periods in history where human beings have had to go through these like huge cultural or even medical illness related situations, whether it's a pandemic or a war or the civil rights movement, just these times of like intense stress culturally. And I actually found that was really helpful to me to feel like connected to these different points in just human history, and particularly as women, thinking about like what did women lean into during those points in history, and how did they rely on each other for strength and support. And so it really highlighted to me, I think, as we've all been kind of talking about, one of the great mental health challenges right now is that many of us are really missing our village. I think that's particularly true as moms, regardless of the age of our children. We know that we rely so heavily on a community of other people to raise our kids and our families. And, that's obviously really changed shape. And I think, when I think about myself, that's probably my biggest worry or anxiety going into the winter, and knowing how scary COVID feels in terms of just preventing more of that like village time. So I think that is one thing that's made it particularly hard. And I think that it's really, I give so much love and credit to Stevie and to Wise for hosting events like this and other events that really like bring that village together and that community together, because from a mental health perspective, we know that there is nothing more powerful than community, nothing. So when you look at research on illnesses from heart disease to high cholesterol to certainly mental health conditions like depression and anxiety, social connectedness always rises to the very top of the predictors when you sort of break down all the risk factors for people. So even more important than things like family history, and other health indicators. So social connectedness is one thing that I just really want to kind of drive home today, that despite the fact that it looks a little bit different these days, or may need to look a little bit different, that we have an opportunity there to really sort of support our mental health. So I actually thought I'd start before going into like all the dire, how we're suffering through 2020 and our mental health. I'm curious if maybe we could spend a little bit of time just reflecting on what's been going well. So is it okay, Stevie, to like ask questions and have people jump in?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay.
You can
Okay.
come off of mute if you're compelled to, whatever you want to do. I just want to make sure that you feel like comfortable knowing that it's being recorded and it will be shared, or you can send it directly to Ashley anonymously too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm really going to challenge you to, if you don't want to share it, that's totally fine. But at the very least, think in your mind, what's something, let's say just in this past week, that you have been, not that just that has gone well, but that has gone well as a function of something maybe that you've invested in. You've invested in yourself or time, or you've done something differently, and that's gone maybe better than you expected. And if anybody would like to share, I'd love to hear. Molly.
Sure. My name is Molly Woodhall. I live in Denver, Colorado. I'm originally from Dayton. And in terms of something that's gone well for me that I've invested in, I am also in the wellness industry here in Denver, Colorado, and I invested in creating an online self-led program called Realistic Self-Care. And it has gone really well. And having a small business of my own, I don't have a lot of overhead, so I've never really had to invest much capital in my business. And so honestly, the minute I provided the option to the public and to potential corporations, it like kind of blew up, and it's been great. So it's power in investing in the self for sure.
That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm excited to check out your offerings. Janet chatted, I think, to everybody, but it's been more intentional about exercise, trying some yoga practice. That's awesome. That's on my list. Anybody else? I always say that I am trained as a therapist, and so I can sit in silence for very long periods of awkward time. People aren't answering. I'm taking action in my personal health and being my advocate. Kyla said I got back to reading, just finished Untamed. So good. I really want to start an Untamed book club, by the way.
Yes, where we just read it over and over and over again.
Yeah, and then talk about how we need to meet Abby Wambach. But yeah.
And come up with alternative theories. I'm like, oh yeah, great.
Laura's eating and cooking better. Gina did a photo shoot for Cincinnati Magazine, feature for top doctors. Oh, congratulations. That's amazing. That's awesome. Oh, and she does, yes. Awesome. Well, that's great. I mean, I think that there's so much value in obviously reflecting on our gratitudes, the things that we are happy are going well in our lives. And I also urge you to do what we're doing here, where you're really thinking about what are the things that are going well because of something that you have manifested. And of course, we can't control everything. And honestly, there's relatively little that we can control right now, particularly. And yet when we can focus on those things, even if they're like at the micro level, that's where we see those 1 degree of changes that turn into really big changes. Well, I love daily meditation, exercise, yoga, and weight loss while looking for a job. Nice. Nice. That makes me tired just hearing it. So kudos. All right. So our brains on 2020. I just thought I've been really wanting to kind of frame for people what the experience of this year has been like. And I think that there's no term that better describes it than we are experiencing a collective trauma. And I think I've experienced a few people, not many, most people when I share that say, like that feels exactly right. And there are a few people that feel like maybe that's too strong. Like I haven't been touched by, anyone dying from COVID, or I haven't, lived in an area where, businesses just shut down. And yet I really think that framing what we're experiencing as not just a trauma, but a collective trauma is really vital to understand how our brains in particular are processing what's happening around us and in our everyday life. So the way that we kind of define trauma in the mental health world is the experience of actual or perceived threats to our safety, security, and well-being of ourselves or someone else close to us. And that's important to recognize or important to call out because it's not just a life or death situation. It's also any threat to our sense of safety, our sense of security, the stability that we rely on to, make the decisions that we make and, live out our lives the way that we want to live them out. And what makes something a trauma, meaning it sort of persists after the event is over, is that it overwhelms our ability to cope in some way. So that can be mentally, physically, financially, emotionally, and then causes this psychological distress that we're experiencing. What makes what we're experiencing collective trauma, obviously, is the fact that we're all going through it. We're all going through it, somewhat together, although we know that certain groups of people are disproportionately impacted, namely people of color impacted by COVID, namely working mothers impacted by a lot of the economic losses that are happening. So we're experiencing it together. And if you're not kind of familiar with this concept, one of the things that makes us so unique as human beings is that we have what we call empathy, which means that we have these mirror neurons in our brains that allow us to feel the pain of other people. And so we experience that just like we're experiencing pain ourselves. Some of us have that more sensitively than others. It affects us to a greater degree, but what makes us human, unless you are a psychopath really, is that you have the ability to perceive the feelings of others. So not only are we going through our own experiences of how this year is impacting us, but we're taking in the data and the experience of everybody around us, whether that's people close to us, whether it's people we see just in our communities or on the news. And so I say all that because when we think about what's going on through the lens of collective trauma, we can start to understand that our brains are also functioning from this place of feeling traumatized. And why that's important is because it explains a lot of what happens in the brain when we're in situations and times of uncertainty. So things to know just about how we respond is in moments of trauma is that the thinking center of our brain gets underactivated. And the reason for that is because if we were out, early human days, if we were out on the savannah and we saw a lion, we don't want to sit there and think about what we want to do to get out of the situation. We just need to spring into action. We also don't want to spend time sort of being in our fear. And so so our emotion regulation center of our brain gets underactivated. So we're not thinking as well, we're not as emotionally regulated, and our fear center gets overactivated and takes over. Now, the interesting thing about the situation we're in, of course, is that it's not this sort of constant, it's not an acute threat. It's not lasting. Maybe many of us in the beginning, we thought this might be a few weeks to even a few months. And so we felt like, our bodies were sort of surging with adrenaline and stress hormones and things like that, sort of gearing up for getting through this short period of time. The fact that this is as chronic and prolonged as it is means that our brains have been trying to function like this on some level, maybe not an acute level, but sort of in the background for a really long time. And I think one of the things that we have to talk about is the fact that our brains get tired. Our brains are, and our emotional systems and our bodies, of course, as a function of all of that, are just fatigued. And I think that we're getting to this point right now when it comes to mental health, where we are, 8 months into the COVID crisis, facing, rising numbers, things getting worse, going into this darker, both kind of figuratively and just like physically darker, because we have less sunlight in this colder period of time. And so the stage is really set for mental health challenges to creep up if they haven't already. What we've seen is that this is just some data that I thought was interesting about occurrence of mental health conditions over the first 3 months of COVID. So this was back, March through June. Unfortunately, I don't have data yet for post that time. But if you can see here, this is the pink lines are the average diagnoses of depression, anxiety in a typical year. So around 7% of people will be diagnosed with depression in a given year. The lifetime prevalence is like 20%. 20% of us will experience depression at some point in our lifetime, but in any given year, about 7%. And the number was almost 35% just in the first 3 months of the COVID crisis. Similar with anxiety, stress, we didn't have like a good marker for pre-COVID, but we can imagine that stress has risen over the course of COVID. So those are just, some quantitative insights into how pervasive these mental health challenges are. I know I saw, for those in Cincinnati, there was an article, I think I saw it this morning, that said there have been 15 kids from Mason High School who were admitted for suicidal ideation in the past week. So we're seeing that this truly is becoming a mental health crisis. It's not just impacting on our mental wellness, but it's actually becoming a mental health crisis for many of us.
Well, and Ashley, just one alarming statistic that I know, there's two groups that I know in particular that I've been paying close attention to through this. One is obviously healthcare providers, number one, risk of burnout, number one, unfortunately, highest suicide rate, right? But what we've seen is that in this pandemic also, members of our Black population have, like, that the number of death by suicide has risen dramatically to where they have exceeded all other populations. And I think that it just speaks to, again, the compounding challenges that we're all facing right now. But in particular, you kind of take all of those different pieces and layer them on top of each other. Again, not trying to like paint a grim picture, but I do think as a part of the WISE culture, we try to be truthful and transparent and put things out there of like things that are truly like we're seeing a downstream impact of that, like how it's impacting our children now too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for naming that specifically. So I want to get into some discussion and not just sort of leave you with statistics and such, but I thought I'd share just a few kind of principles and practices that I think have been helpful for folks over these past several months and probably will continue to be really important as we go into the next kind of phase of everything we're dealing with. One is really thinking about where our expectations lie for ourselves. So I really like getting into helping people understand and conceptualize what we're experiencing on this, on this cultural level that's impacting our our own biology, because I think it gives us a sense of awareness of what's going on with our bodies, first of all, what's going on with our minds, what's going on with our concentration and our memory and our focus, and why a lot of those things are really struggling right now. And one of the biggest things I'm hearing from people is that they just feel like I just don't have the energy or the motivation that I wish that I did, that I'm used to having. And so I think that it's not always what we want to hear, because we want to hear, I think a lot of us, especially as women with these bold aspirations, and we know that there are ways that we can really change the world. We don't want to hear that we might need to sort of evaluate our expectations of ourselves. But it's my fear for women as a whole, and for all of us, is that if we don't do some of that, we are going to burn out spectacularly. The sort of forces that be are going to become sort of overwhelming. And I think we're going to continue to see a lot of people, and women in particular, again, leaving the workforce. And we've been talking a lot about this. And I know that, WISE has done a lot to kind of spotlight this issue. So if we don't make these fundamental changes, our impact is going to really be downshifted. So I think when we think about our expectations of ourselves, and I said in our kids here, have we shifted them in proportion to the situation that we're in? And so that may just be a question to sort of ponder. And where is there potentially opportunity to shift that a little bit further? And I think that this really gets into, I know Laris is on here, and she loves really getting into how do we connect that with our values and what's most important to us? And are those things sort of lining up right now? If we only have X amount of capacity, whether that's, time in the day or brain power, we need extra sleep. A lot of people are talking about how they're finding themselves sleeping so much more. That's a good thing. Our brains need that as much as possible right now, but it might leave less time for other things. So are there things that we are focusing ourselves on where we can add the most value, derive the most value? And where might we need to shift our expectations? So I'm going to pause there. I'm wondering if anybody has found themselves doing this over these past maybe several months. Are there things that you've been able to sort of successfully take off of your plate, or shift your expectations around, or accept kind of mediocrity?
Yeah. Ashley?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I love this concept you have here of shifting the goalposts, because I'm not sure a lot of women have really shifted themselves. Now it's more like doing more with less.
Mm-hmm.
It's worrying about your children. It's now maybe being your children's teacher. It's worrying about your career. It's worrying about all that stuff. And I guess one of my things is, I'm not sure I'm hearing the organizations that I'm working with haven't exactly shifted their expectations. They might have shifted their work environment where their people are working, but I really haven't heard anyone say any expectations have really shifted. Mm-hmm. It's still, high performance, low maintenance. Mm-hmm. And I like it. I will tell you, because, you and I, because, when you're teaching this stuff, you feel like, okay, I got to start practicing it more, myself, to be authentic. And I have noticed, especially during the election, an enormous amount of anxiety. I think I think I'm an empathetic person. So when you're coaching people all day long and you see how stressed people are, and then you turn on the news and you see how stressed the nation is. I told Stevie one Monday, I was like, okay, I'm done. I had to move some appointments and stuff, because I could tell my own body, that physical part of my body, was starting to work up, like before you have an anxiety attack or something. Mm-hmm. I could literally feel myself starting to work up.
Yeah.
So I love that you bring this up, because I think it's such an important thing for us. Why should we think as women everything's the same? The same cleaning, the same running the errands, the same caregiving, the same cooking home-cooked meals, all that stuff, when the whole world has changed around us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, can I ask a question on that? Because I'm wondering, are we grasping for normalcy?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just kind
Yeah.
of, and it wasn't until you said that I'm like, is it because we're trying to create conditions like that reflect comfort when nothing looks familiar anymore? And I'm just, I don't know. It really is interesting.
I think that is an excellent point. I noticed myself, so a patient of mine or a client of mine actually used the term with me. She said, I feel like the shock absorber in my family. And that resonated so hard with me. I'm using it all the time now because I think that and I think aligns to what you're saying, Stevie. Like, I feel like I want to absorb all the shock, especially with regard to my kids, so that they feel as little of it as possible. But then that means just working, that much harder and trying to be that many more things to different people. So that's a really good point.
It's really powerful. And I think that like the boundaries that you're speaking to, Loris, that you and I in particular spoke to, I think it's really, it's not wanting to let other people, when you're the strong one, like so many of us are as women, I think a lot of times that shock absorber thing is so real because we don't want to put ourselves onto other people. And I know like there's, a handful of people on this call for me that like when I've kind of raised the white flag and been like, I'm out, like I can't do this anymore, like I'm done. It really is amazing, but it takes energy from other people to rally around you. And they're happy to do it, but it's like this already depleted energy you're taking something from, and you hope that being able to care for somebody else generates
Right.
joy. So it's this interesting, like we're all depleted, but we're all trying to come together as a community. And like, I do wonder and have a hypothesis about like us looking left and right through this empowerment, if maybe it's exacerbating it a little bit, in the sense of like, we want to move the goalpost forward because so many of us are at service of others.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I think to piggyback on one of the things that you said about sort of like turning to your community, when you're depleted. And I think that it's so true that I think we are collectively kind of hesitant to do as much of that as we need to right now, because we are also assuming that everyone else, we know that because this is collective, that everyone is going through such a difficult time. But I would say just even personally, anecdotally, I feel like it's one of those things where, we are like as a community kind of taking shifts on when we're reaching our low point, which is great because then I think we can lean into each other when, this week is just like, I've had it and I just can't do anymore. And that's where, my friend can pick up my kids for a few hours and do some socially distanced play date or something. And next week I'll do it for her. So I think that there is this, because it has been so prolonged, there's an opportunity still to kind of lean into each other in different ways. Okay. So I've talked through some of this. I wanted just to talk about some mindset shifts that I also think have been helpful. So I think one of them is just thinking about the fact that while again, we're not in an acute crisis at this moment, although I guess depending on where you are geographically, maybe you are, but we are certainly in this chronic crisis. And so, as I've been saying, with like understanding the way that our brains are functioning, how our productivity is changing, how we're parenting, how we are in relationships, I think that one of the tools that's been helpful to me that I've tried to sort of ground myself in is thinking about, 30, let's be generous. Okay. So let's just say 30 years from now, when I'm looking back on this period of time and this period of my life, particularly as a parent is where I've spent most of my time thinking about this, but also as a business leader and as a person and a friend, what is it that I want to be able to, share with my children or maybe even with my grandchildren about like how we sort of survive this time as a community. I like often imagine I'm writing about this in the history books and and us being able to say like, oh yeah, when we went through this period, this is how I showed up for my community, for my family. And that has been really helpful for me, not in a way that is like inspiring a lot of pressure to sort of perform something. There's like nothing that I need less than, more of that, but more so in a way of kind of connecting to the values that I want to be living by. I can imagine, especially with having young kids, that, they might look back on this time as like a really special time when, dad worked from home and we got to have this much more intimate little birthday party and all of the like lovely things that might be a possibility right now, but also recognizing that this is a period of crisis and we're going to function differently. I've also been just in the parenting realm, there's a concept, it comes from like the early 1900s by a psychologist named Winnicott, and he, at the time, just for some background, at the time, there was all of this, like everything in psychology was basically, telling us that everything bad that happened to us is our parents' fault. And it sort of started to breed this idea in the community that you have to be this perfect parent or you're going to screw up your kids. And so he came out with this idea that said that we just have to be good enough parents. And he defined what that was. And, for the psychological health of our kids, basically, he said, you just have to reach a good enough parent status. And for him, that really meant that you are essentially just sort of tuned into who your kid is. You provide for their basic needs, including, safety and security, and you're kind of tuned into who your kid is. And so I rely on that quite a lot when feeling overwhelmed by, all of everything with parenting and all of the sort of narrative out there about what we need to do. And especially during this time where it feels particularly hard and the decisions that we're making feel really crucial, that at the end of the day, my kids are going to be just fine as long as I'm a good enough parent. I know I can provide sort of the basic things that they need, and I can be tuned into who they are. Now, being tuned into who they are, however, means that I have to be kind of tuned into who I am and what I need to be able to show up presently. And so the last point here is just that self-compassion is not weakness, which is something I've been, working on for years and years, and recognizing that giving ourselves grace and an opportunity to see how what we're experiencing is reflected everywhere in the experiences of other people. That's really what self-compassion is not acknowledging that we can't do it, but it might be that we don't want to do it right now. Someone put something in the chat, so I'm hoping we can. Yeah, so Lisa shared, that her daughter, is that your daughter? Yeah, tested positive for COVID last week. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. It's so challenging right now. It's so challenging. And I think you mentioned in that comment that she plays D1 soccer and no season and remote learning, and just all of the grief and loss that's associated with everything going on right now, I think is so hard. And for us to show up for other people through their grief and loss and what they're losing out on opportunities and experiences. Well, thank you for sharing that. So, the last thing I want to kind of like formally share is just about some physical shifts. And, I've been talking about this idea that we're all kind of functioning from crisis mode. And what that means in terms of our physical body is that we've been in this kind of constant stress cycle over and over and over again over these last 8 months, and for many of us for probably years and years, but in this chronic stress state. And so what happens when we are in a chronic stress state is that, all of the stress hormones in our body are just sort of constantly flooding our body, then we might be able to kind of get over the hump of a particular stressor, like we meet a deadline or we're able to do something that we, has been really challenging for us. And so we make it around sort of the first 4 of these little circles. So there's some cue, something tells us something needs to be done. We go into action, we mobilize ourselves, and we get it resolved, because that's what we do as effective women. But what we're often missing is that final stage of the stress cycle, which is that restoration phase, that phase where we allow our bodies and our minds to kind of go back to homeostasis and reset. So what happens currently, where we're missing out, when we miss out on that restoration phase, as we go through the cue, activation, mobilization, resolution, back to the next cue, the next time that something's needed. And we're sort of always wired, always on edge, and always feeling sort of wired and ready for that next crisis situation to happen. When we fail to allow our bodies and our minds to get into that restoration phase, we don't release all of that cortisol. All those stress hormones just continue to sort of live in our body. Inflammation happens, all of these things that we talk about being associated with illness and disease. So when we talk about stress-related illnesses, this is a big part of how that happens on a physiological level. So one of the most important things you can do is figure out what some of your go-to ways are for completing that stress cycle, for operating in that, or getting into that restoration phase. And what we know about how we do that is that physicality is really important. It can be helpful to kind of mentally turn off, but we actually know that for the way that stress hormones live in the body, being able to sort of work that out and replace them with more positive hormones like oxytocin and the kind of feel-good dopamine, the feel-good hormones, is how we get ourselves sort of physically regulated again. Yeah, that's probably why my neck muscles are so tight. Oh, shoulders. Yes, totally. So actually massage is a great one, because it's like physically working things out of your body. Exercise, movement. Sex is a great one, because it's both the physicality and the oxytocin release, whether with somebody else or yourself. Giving a long hug, 15 seconds, has the same oxytocin release as is enough to sort of boost our mood. So there's all kinds of things. It doesn't have to be something involved or long, but if we go from one stressor to the next, it's actually what we call allostress, which is it's kind of like, if you're familiar with autoimmune diseases, it's the idea that where your immune system almost starts to attack itself. It's like something that was meant to be protective is now attacking us. And that's what happens with stress hormones. They're meant to be protective because they're kind of kicking us into gear when there's a big stressor, but now they're actually attacking our body. So we have to find ways that we can get out of that stress cycle, taking a walk on, the little breaks that we have.
What did you call that? Did you call that allostress?
Yes, ALLOSTRESS.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. 20-minute naps. That's a great one. Yeah. Our brains do so much consolidation of stuff while we're sleeping. So that's so helpful. And just to have that sort of mental reset.
Ashley, I've taught my 2 labs nappies. I say nappy.
Like dog labs?
Yeah, my 2 labs, I've taught them the word
That's
nappy.
awesome.
And so about between 3 and 4, I'll just say nappy time, and everybody has to chill out in the house. There's no playtime. There's no anything. I might just sit there and read my, pirate book or something, but it's just nappy time.
I love it. I love it. Yep. What have you found to sort of complete the stress cycle? What are things that are helpful or that you've built in or that you think could help?
I know I go for a run when mostly because I'm so bad at it that my attention, I can't multitask when I do it. And so it just allows for me to not try to solve problems in my restoration. But as Laura said, she talked to us the other day a little bit about the restoration and the renewal not being something that's habitual anymore. So I've been thinking a lot about that, about like I need to pepper in other things to keep the dopamine alive, right? And to like it be something that I can really push myself on and have like a suite of things that can help me.
Yeah, that's a great point. Anybody else? I like hot showers too, just as a sort of, it's something that like feels very releasing from a physical standpoint for me. So that's been kind of a go-to during this time. Well, you mentioned, and Stevie mentioned multitasking, and that's the kind of just next point I wanted to make, which I think we're becoming so much more cognizant of this in our kind of culture today, although I think in terms of like how we actually handle it behaviorally, we're still really struggling to, make changes to not multitask, because there's, always a million things that we can be choosing from to complete. But we know that the reality is we really can't do two cognitive things at once. It just cannot happen, and we lose so much productivity. So if the way that it's stressing our bodies and our minds isn't enough sort of reason to try to work on decreasing this, the fact that it's really inefficient too. But I think that it's certainly easy to say right now that we need to work on decreasing our multitasking. But when we have, homeschooling and running a work project and trying to figure out what's going to happen for dinner and all of, sorry, I just caught organic peppermint hot tea. I love that one too. It can feel really, really difficult. And so I think that number one, becoming cognizant of our tendency to do that, and to kind of get caught in that trap is really helpful for us to be able to sort of make our way out of it. But the thing that I have found is more effective than anything else is being able to do some mindfulness practice. And that often can feel really intimidating for people, or, they feel like, well, just meditation or mindfulness doesn't work for me. And I really encourage people to start with something that feels really, really sort of simple and is associated with something you're already doing. So often when I talk about mindfulness and someone's sort of starting out a practice, I'll encourage them, for example, to take the time that they're brushing their teeth in the evening or in the morning. Maybe, pick one time of day when you're brushing your teeth and see if for 10 seconds while you're brushing your teeth, you can pay attention to nothing else except the feeling of the toothbrush. So it could be something as, this isn't sort of sitting on a yoga mat necessarily for 40 minutes trying to clear your mind. It's all that mindfulness is paying attention on purpose without judgment. And it is one of the very best things that we can practice for decreasing stress, decreasing anxiety, reducing irritability, and then as a result of that, really decreasing our risk factors for things like an anxiety disorder or depression. Does anybody practice mindfulness in any kind of form? Stevie's like, maybe.
Yeah. Ashley, I really like Headspace helps me.
Yeah.
And Calm.
Yeah.
I think the Calm app I use at night, like their sleep stories, and just get you in a frame of mind where your monkey mind focuses on something else and leaves the days kind of behind.
Yeah.
But also Headspace, just because sometimes I'll sit there and I'll think, oh my gosh, how much longer? And when you do have someone guide you through it, it's like the pressure to keep track of anything is no longer there, and you just let the guy guide you. I love that.
Yeah, me too. I found that for me, it's much too hard to just sort of sit in silence. I'm seeing Kyla said that she sits in silence as often as you can, which is awesome. And I should say I've been trying with like very small doses, like 5 seconds, 10 seconds. But I love the meditation apps and like guided meditation where I can like allow somebody to kind of lead me through it. It like lets me kind of sink into it a little bit more. Yeah. Meditation every day, says Lisa. That's awesome. There are good days and bad meditation days. Yeah. And remembering that it's a practice, obviously, and there's a reason why we call it meditation practice or mindfulness practice. I know that we are kind of getting to the end of time. So I was curious if, are there any kind of topics or questions that anybody wants to bring up? And even if we don't have time here, I'm always happy to talk offline or send some thoughts as well. Let's give some space for that.
I wanted to just provide a little bit of like going back to the goalpost concept, because I think that as we are approaching the holidays, I know that there's a lot of members of our community that have been having discussions about having hard conversations with family about the holidays, not going to large family gatherings, or maybe being asked to not come to large family gatherings, and what things are going to look like this year. And I think that I just want to give people permission to kind of grieve that, I think, a little bit of what that's going to look like. But that doesn't also mean like, I want people to just acknowledge how they feel instead of moving through it, because I think that that will do more harm than good. I know for myself, acknowledging like this is the only time that I see some members of my family. We've already kind of made a decision that we're not, I don't feel that it's the right thing to do personally for our family to connect with those people. But I also find myself wanting to now like fill that space with things, and like to try to make Christmas and the holiday season like that much more magical, and like resist the urge, Stevie. Like let there be space. Like, is that the gift in all of this? Is the free space instead, or to pick and choose things that are in alignment with my values, and just be really intentional about how we're filling the space again. Because you know what's not going to lift me up is now 30 Zoom calls with family members, because guess what? Like I can do that. I could have done that anytime this whole year. I could have done that. Why does it have to be packed into that like little time, you know? So I'm really like trying to just resist the urge to like pack it full, and using the space to really self-reflect on what I can do for myself during this time.
What a great reminder. It made me think about, I just saw yesterday that Zoom like lifted their 40-minute limit for the free calls. I don't know if you saw that for Thanksgiving Day, like to do like a free account, you can do calls longer than 40 minutes. And I was sitting there thinking, that there was at least a time limit before. Now it's indefinite. No, but I totally agree with you, Stevie. Really thinking about what's going to be the most, what do you want in that space? I'm feeling the same way. We've decided to not do kind of a family gathering. And so, but then again, that kind of pressure of like, I want it to be special for my kids. So what does that mean? But I just ordered Thanksgiving dinner from Whole Foods yesterday, and it's going to be what it is. So
I think we're going for we're going to try to do like different wine tastings.
Ooh,
like we're going to do like France, and then like do like not anything traditional Thanksgiving, like do France and then Italy, and then maybe do Spain, and like try to do different foods and stuff. Because like I said, it's
awesome.
Yeah, because I love cooking and I never make time for it. It's like Ashley was saying, flower arranging for her. Like that's that kind of stuff. When I'm being creative and kind of create space for that, that's when I'm my best self. And I know when I'm just like ordering, like I'm about to do DoorDash, I'm my best self. Just give me the food. Like I just feel like my stomach's growling. So yeah.
There's different times for different things. So sometimes it's a DoorDash time.
Right. Well, great. Well, I know we are at time, and we've got, I'm sure, more questions that people would like to ask. So here's what I would say. One, thank you so much, Molly, for putting your program in the chat. I really appreciate it. I think that extending these types of offerings to people is hugely helpful. I would highly encourage anybody, if you have any questions, please reach out to Ashley or go to Galia Collaborative. Their website is very robust and very, very, very easy to navigate. So you should not have any issues getting in contact with someone. Ashley, if you're not following her on social media platforms, her Instagram always seems to have exactly what you need to hear in the moment, and is always incredibly relevant and poignant. And I highly encourage you to follow her at Galia Collaborative. And I think that just what I would ask of everybody is everything that you heard today, just really let it sink in. And I encourage everybody who is in a position that they feel, if they're feeling stretched, just really go back to the, oh, I froze for a second, I think. It just really go back to the concept, I think, of the goalpost of like, what is the real end goal at this moment? And are we really pushing ourselves beyond what we should be at this point in order to, again, feel like we're able, are we really setting unrealistic expectations for ourselves and for each other? So thank you everyone for joining today. We will have more events coming up here in the next coming weeks. Don't forget that please share with your communities that Wise Wellness Guild now reflection level membership is free. We made that decision to shift to free to be able to support a wide variety of audiences during this time, especially now that things are continuing to pick back up again and we're moving into darker months, but brighter days ahead, as I would say, keeping things positive. Next week, we have some really incredible speakers. We have following week a letter writing exercise that just really looking towards gratitude and supporting one another during this time. So check us out, wisewellnessguild.com. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ashley. Really grateful for your time, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a good day. Thanks.